I still remember the sound of the champagne glass shattering. It hit the marble floor right after my father laughed and said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "This is my biggest failure. My own daughter, a useless mistake I should have cut off years ago." And everyone laughed with him. That was the night something inside me didn't just break. It hardened. Because 5 days later, the same man who humiliated me on his birthday would walk into a courtroom confident and walk out with nothing left. Not his company. Not his reputation. Not even his family. And the worst part, he never saw it coming. If you've ever been underestimated, mocked by someone who should have protected you, or pushed so far that silence turns into resolve, then you'll understand this story. Before we begin, take a second to like and subscribe if you believe karma always finds its way back. My name is Courtney, and I tell stories about justice, betrayal, and the moment a daughter decides she's done being small. And I need to know, where are you listening from tonight? Now, let me tell you what happened on my father's birthday. My father loved power more than he loved people. He was the kind of man who walked into rooms like he owned the oxygen. Every handshake was a calculation, every smile had an agenda. To the outside world he was flawless. Self-made millionaire, owner of a thriving construction empire, generous donor to local charities, a pillar of the community. But inside our home, he was precise, cold, and casually cruel in ways that never left bruises, only wounds that lived under the skin. Growing up, I learned early that my father didn't believe in unconditional love. He believed in value. You earn your place, he used to say, even in this family. My older sister Lena was brilliant, straight-A student, future lawyer, she earned his approval. My younger brother Mark was athletic, team captain, he earned his pride. And me, I was observant, creative. I loved architecture, but not the kind that built skyscrapers for profit. I loved restoring old buildings, preserving stories, designing homes that felt safe. To him, that was weakness. I remember being 11 years old, holding up a sketch of a small brick house with wide windows and a garden. He barely glanced at it. "Cute," he said flatly, "but cute doesn't make money." That word stuck with me. Cute. As if everything I loved was childish. As if I was. By the time I was 16, the humiliation had become routine. At dinner parties he'd chuckle and say, "Courtney here thinks she's going to fix old houses. Maybe she can fix ours first." People laughed. At business events, he'd introduce me with a hand on my shoulder that felt more like a grip. "This one's my sensitive one," he'd say, "not built for the real world." The first few times I burned with embarrassment. After a while I just felt numb. But numbness is dangerous. Because when you're numb long enough, you stop reacting. And when you stop reacting, people assume you'll tolerate anything. I went to college anyway, studied architecture, graduated near the top of my class. I didn't ask him for money. I didn't ask him for connections. I built my own small restoration firm from scratch, long nights, cheap coffee, drafting until my fingers cramped. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The first time I completed a full renovation project on my own, I invited him to see it. He walked through the restored Victorian home slowly, hands behind his back. The floors gleamed, the stained glass windows caught the afternoon sun, the kitchen blended modern lines with antique charm. It was beautiful. He stopped in the center of the living room and said, "You spent months on this." "Yes," I answered. He nodded once. "You could have built 3 new properties in the time you wasted saving one." That was it. No pride. No acknowledgement. Just dismissal. I smiled anyway. But something inside me shifted. And then came his 50th birthday. He decided to host it at the country club. Crystal chandeliers, black-tie dress code, a string quartet near the balcony. The guest list was a who's who of investors, politicians and business partners. My siblings were there. My mother stood quietly beside him, as she always did. And me. I was invited as decoration. The creative daughter. I remember standing near the champagne tower, listening to conversations about expansions and mergers. The room smelled like expensive cologne and ambition. When it was time for speeches, my brother went first. He praised Dad's vision and discipline. Applause. My sister spoke next. She called him a titan. More applause. Then my father stepped forward. He thanked his guests. He praised his real heirs. And then his eyes landed on me. A slow smile spread across his face. Of course, he said, lifting his glass, every empire has experiments. Laughter rippled across the room. I felt my stomach drop. He pointed at me lightly with his glass. Courtney chose to play with old houses instead of building a real legacy, but that's fine, not everyone is meant to win. The room went quiet for a second. Then someone laughed. And suddenly everyone was laughing. My face burned, my ears rang, I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. He wasn't done. She's proof that even I can make a mistake, he added casually. And that's when the champagne glass slipped from my hand. It shattered against the marble floor. The sharp crack silenced the room. All eyes turned to me. I could have cried. I could have screamed. Instead, I bent down slowly, placed the broken stem on the tray of a passing waiter, and looked my father straight in the eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't look away. He smirked. And in that moment, I knew something he didn't. He thought I was weak. He thought humiliation would keep me small. He had no idea what I'd discovered 3 weeks earlier. And he definitely didn't know what was coming. 5 days later, we would stand in a courtroom. And the man who called me his biggest mistake would finally understand what he'd created. 3 weeks before his birthday. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about survival. My restoration business was struggling, not failing but constantly on the edge. Clients loved the results, but restoration work is slow, expensive, and not nearly as profitable as new construction. I worked 16-hour days. I skipped meals. I slept in my office more nights than I admit. And every time I passed one of my father's massive construction sites, towering cranes cutting through the skyline, I felt that familiar pressure in my chest. The quiet voice that whispered, "You'll never measure up." I hated that voice, because it sounded exactly like him. That afternoon, I was inspecting a property my firm had been hired to assess. It was an old municipal records building slated for demolition. The city planned to sell the land to a private developer. I was there to evaluate whether any historical elements needed preservation. It was dusty, dim. The air smelled like old paper and damp wood. I walked through the abandoned corridors, my flashlight beam sliding across peeling paint and rusted filing cabinets. Then I noticed something strange. One office near the back wasn't empty. It was locked, and it had a newer padlock than anything else in the building. Curiosity is dangerous, but it's also what saved me. I called the city clerk to get permission to inspect the room. After some back and forth, they approved it. When the maintenance worker cut the lock and swung open the door, I saw stacks of banker boxes, neatly labeled, "Recent, very recent." I opened one. Inside were financial documents, contracts, permits, invoices, and at the top of the first stack, I saw my father's company logo. My heart skipped. At first, I assumed it was routine construction paperwork. Then I started reading. And the deeper I read, the colder my hands became. The documents showed something illegal. Very illegal. My father's company had been falsifying safety inspection reports for multiple large construction projects. They were using substandard materials. skipping critical structural reinforcements, and bribing inspectors to sign off anyway. There were internal emails, payment records, signed approvals, all traced back to his personal authorization. It wasn't just cutting corners. It was fraud. Dangerous, large-scale fraud. The kind that could get people killed. I sat on the dusty floor of that abandoned office, the papers spread around me, my breathing shallow. Because suddenly memories flooded back. News reports about a parking garage collapse 2 years ago. A residential building evacuation due to structural cracks. At the time they were called unfortunate accidents. Now I knew the truth. They weren't accidents. They were consequences. Of him. I should have reported it immediately. That's what a good person would do. But I didn't. Not at first. Because the moment I saw his signature on those documents, I felt something ugly rise inside me. Years of humiliation. Years of being dismissed. Years of being told I was weak. All of it twisted together into one dangerous thought. He deserves to fall. Not just legally. Completely. But revenge isn't simple. And it isn't clean. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my apartment staring at the ceiling, the city lights flickering through the blinds. My chest felt tight. My mind ran in circles. If I exposed him, it wouldn't just destroy his company. It would destroy my family. My mother depended on him financially. My siblings worked for his business. And despite everything, he was still my father. The word itself hurt. Because part of me still wanted something I'd never had. Approval. Love. A single moment where he looked at me and said, "I'm proud of you." Instead, I had a stack of documents proving he was willing to risk lives for profit. And the realization hit me slowly, painfully. He wasn't just cruel. He was dangerous. For 2 weeks I did nothing. I went to work. I smiled at clients. I pretended everything was normal. But inside I was unraveling. Every time I saw his name on a billboard, my stomach turned. Every time I heard someone praise his integrity, I felt physically sick. And then came his birthday party. The humiliation. The laughter. The moment he called me his biggest mistake. And something inside me snapped into focus. Because in that moment, I finally understood something that changed everything. He would never change. He would never respect me. He would never stop hurting people. Unless someone stopped him. That night after the party I went home, kicked off my heels and sat on the floor in the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there. Very still. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to think clearly about revenge. Not emotional revenge. Not impulsive revenge. Calculated justice. The kind that leaves no doubt. No escape. No recovery. My hands trembled slightly as I opened my laptop. I pulled up the scanned copies of the documents. And I started researching. Legal procedures. Whistleblower protections. Corporate fraud cases. Evidence submission requirements. I worked until sunrise. And by morning, I had a plan. But executing it would mean something terrifying. I would have to go to war with my own father. And once I started, there would be no turning back. 2 days later, I received a phone call that nearly made me abandon everything. It was my mother. Her voice was soft, fragile. "Honey," she said gently, "your father has been asking about you." My stomach twisted. He said maybe he was too harsh at the party. My chest tightened painfully. For a moment, hope flickered. Was he finally realizing? Was he finally going to apologize? Then she added quietly, "He wants you to come to dinner. He says he has an offer for you." An offer? Not an apology. Never an apology. I closed my eyes. And in that moment I knew. Whatever he wanted to offer, it wasn't reconciliation. It was control. And I had no idea how far he was willing to go to keep his empire intact. But I was about to find out. Because the next time I saw him, he would unknowingly reveal just how ruthless he truly was. And that would make what I did to him later feel completely justified. The dinner at my parents' house felt like walking into a museum of control. Everything was spotless, perfectly arranged, quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful, it felt watched. The dining room lights were warm, but the air felt cold. My father was already seated when I arrived, hands folded, posture rigid like a king waiting for an audience. He didn't stand to greet me. He never did. My mother gave me a quick, nervous hug before retreating to the kitchen. I sat across from him. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. Every tick sounded louder than the last. Finally, he leaned back slightly and studied me the way he always did, like I was an investment he regretted making. "You embarrassed me," he said calmly. "Not hello. Not how are you. Just that." I swallowed. "You humiliated me first." His lips curved into a thin, humorless smile. "If you're weak enough to be humiliated, that's your problem." The words landed exactly how they always had, sharp, dismissive, cold. But this time they didn't cut me. They confirmed something. He would never see me as a daughter, only as a liability. He slid a folder across the table toward me. "I have a solution," he said. I didn't touch it at first. "What kind of solution?" He clasped his hands together. "You're struggling financially, don't deny it. Your little restoration hobby barely pays rent." The familiar burn rose in my chest. But I stayed quiet. He continued, "I'm willing to bring you into the company." My stomach tightened. Not with relief. With dread. "In what role?" I asked cautiously. "Public relations," he replied. "A symbolic position. You'll attend events, smile for cameras, talk about sustainability. We'll rebrand you as the compassionate daughter." I felt something twist inside me. He wasn't offering support. He was offering a cage. And in return, I asked quietly. His eyes sharpened. "You shut down your business." Silence fell heavy between us. "You're wasting time," he said flatly. "And more importantly, you're damaging the family image by failing publicly." There it was. Not concern. Not care. Image. Control. Always control. I finally opened the folder. Inside was a contract. It included a salary, benefits, and one chilling clause. A non-disclosure agreement that would legally bind me from speaking negatively about the company. Ever. My pulse began to pound. He wasn't just trying to control me. He was trying to silence me. Before I even spoke. He didn't know what I had discovered. But somehow, he sensed I was a threat. I looked up slowly. "Why now?" I asked. He held my gaze. "Because loose ends make me uncomfortable." The words sent a cold wave through my body. Loose ends. That's what he saw me as. Not a daughter. A risk. That was the exact moment my last hesitation died. Because suddenly everything became crystal clear. He would destroy me without a second thought if it protected his empire. So why was I still protecting him? I closed the folder gently and pushed it back toward him. "I'm not signing this." His expression hardened instantly. "You should think carefully." "I have," I said quietly. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid of him. I felt calm. Cold. Certain. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. Courtney, the world isn't kind to people like you. Idealistic, emotional, weak. I met his eyes. You're right about one thing. He raised an eyebrow. The world isn't kind, I said steadily. But neither am I anymore. Something flickered across his face. Not fear. Not yet. But confusion. Because for the first time, he couldn't read me. That night I went home and locked my apartment door behind me. My hands trembled slightly. Not from fear. From adrenaline. Because now there was no doubt. No guilt. No hesitation. What I was about to do wasn't revenge for humiliation. It was justice. For the fraud. For the lives put at risk. For every person he had crushed under his need for control. I opened my laptop and began executing the plan. Step by step. Carefully. Methodically. First, I organized the evidence. Every document was scanned, dated, and cross-referenced. Emails were sorted by timeline. Financial transactions were matched with project permits. I worked for hours without stopping. The process felt strangely calming, like putting pieces of a massive puzzle into place. The more I organized, the clearer the picture became. And the worse his crimes looked. This wasn't one bad decision. It was years of calculated corruption. Next, I contacted a corporate fraud attorney anonymously. The meeting took place in a small office downtown. Neutral walls, soft lighting, the smell of coffee lingering in the air. When I placed the evidence on the table, the attorney's expression shifted from polite interest to stunned seriousness. This, she said quietly, is one of the strongest fraud cases I've ever seen. My chest tightened. What happens if this goes forward? She looked at me carefully. Your father could lose everything. A long pause. And prison is very possible. The word hung in the air. Heavy. Final. For a moment I felt a wave of nausea. Because despite everything, he was still my father. But then I remembered the laughter at the birthday party. The word mistake. The contract meant to silence me. And the families who could have died because of his shortcuts. I straightened slightly. Good, I said. The legal process moved quickly once the case was filed. Regulatory agencies launched investigations. Audits began. Court dates were scheduled. And through it all, he had no idea who started it. Not yet. Because the final step of my plan required patience, perfect timing, and absolute emotional control. I waited, watched, prepared, and then 5 days after his birthday, the day arrived. The day he walked into court confident, arrogant, untouchable, and the day he would finally learn who had brought his empire crashing down. Because when he saw me sitting in that courtroom, he would understand something too late. The daughter he called weak was the one who had quietly dismantled everything he built. The courtroom smelled like polished wood and tension. It was colder than I expected. Or maybe that was just me. I sat 3 rows back from the front, hands folded in my lap, dressed in a simple navy suit. No dramatic entrance, no eye contact. Just a stillness. My father walked in 10 minutes later. Confident. Tailored charcoal suit, silver cufflinks, the same expression he wore at every press conference. Untouchable. He didn't look at the gallery at first. He was too busy speaking with his legal team, nodding, straightening his tie. Then he turned. And he saw me. For a split second, nothing happened. Then his eyebrows pulled together slightly. Confusion. Why is she here? He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just stared. I held his gaze calmly, and something in my stillness unsettled him. He looked away first. The prosecution began outlining the charges: fraud, falsified inspection reports, bribery, endangerment. The words echoed through the courtroom like hammer strikes. Each one landed. Each one chipped away at the image he had built for decades. My father's jaw tightened as evidence was presented. Emails projected onto screens. Bank transfers highlighted in red. His signature enlarged for everyone to see. I watched him carefully. At first he looked irritated, then annoyed, then something else. Because the evidence wasn't vague. It was precise, structured, organized, too organized. And I saw the exact moment realization flickered in his eyes. Someone close to him had done this. The prosecutor announced the anonymous whistleblower had provided extensive documentation. My father's head snapped slightly toward the gallery. He scanned the room. Slowly, deliberately. When his eyes reached me again, they lingered longer. I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I just watched him the way he had watched me my entire life. Evaluating, measuring, unmoved. And in that moment, he knew. He didn't have proof yet, but he knew. The trial lasted 4 days. 4 days of testimony. 4 days of financial breakdowns. 4 days of engineers explaining how his shortcuts could have killed people. And with every passing hour, the weight of his arrogance began to crumble. Reporters filled the courtroom by day 2. Headlines spread across the city. Construction mogul under investigation. Empire built on lies. The community hero narrative shattered. Sponsors pulled out. Investors distanced themselves. Even my siblings stopped appearing publicly beside him. On the 3rd day during recess, he approached me in the hallway. No cameras. No audience. Just us. His voice was low. Controlled. Did you do this? There it was. Not how could you. Not why. Just did you. I held his gaze steadily. You taught me something important, I said quietly. His eyes narrowed. You said the world isn't kind. Silence stretched between us. And you were right. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Not anger. Not dominance. Uncertainty. The verdict came on the 5th day. Guilty on multiple counts of fraud and bribery. The courtroom felt suspended in air, like no one was breathing. My father stood rigid as the judge outlined financial penalties, asset freezes, and pending criminal sentencing. His company would be dismantled, properties seized, licenses revoked. The empire he built brick by brick. Gone. Just like that. Gasps echoed softly through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. And I watched him. Because this wasn't about money. It wasn't even about prison. It was about power. And for the first time in his life, he had none. As officers approached to escort him out pending sentencing, he turned one last time. Our eyes met across the courtroom. There was no shouting. No dramatic scene. Just a long, silent stare. His expression wasn't rage. It wasn't even betrayal. It was something worse. Disbelief. As if he genuinely never imagined I was capable of this. As if the idea that I could outthink him had never existed in his mind. And in that moment, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not joy. Relief. A slow, steady release of pressure I had carried for years. The weight of being small. The weight of being dismissed. The weight of trying to earn love that would never come. Gone. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. I slipped through the side exit quietly. No interviews. No public statements. Justice didn't need a speech. It spoke for itself. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. My siblings distanced themselves from me at first. They called me cruel, heartless. But as investigations expanded, more truth surfaced. Unsafe buildings, hidden settlements, people nearly harmed. Slowly, their anger turned into silence. Then distance from him instead of me. My mother moved into a smaller home. We began speaking more honestly than we ever had before. She once said softly, "I think you were the only one brave enough." I didn't feel brave. I felt done. My business, it survived. More than that, it grew. Clients respected integrity. They trusted someone who chose safety over profit. I worked harder than ever. But this time not to prove myself. To build something clean. Solid. Honest. The way construction should be. Sometimes at night, I still think about that birthday party. The laughter. The shattered glass. The word mistake. But now when I remember it, I don't feel pain. I feel clarity. Because that was the night he underestimated me for the last time. People ask if I regret it. If I regret exposing my own father. The truth. I regret that he forced the choice. I regret that power mattered more to him than people. But I don't regret standing up. Silence protects abusers. Action protects everyone else. And sometimes justice looks like revenge, when really it's accountability finally catching up. He once said I wasn't built for the real world. He was wrong. I just wasn't built for his world. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, humiliated, or told you were weak, remember this. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. Kind doesn't mean incapable. And sometimes the person they mock the most is the one who ends up rewriting the ending. I'm Courtney. Thank you for listening. Before you go, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and have you ever had to stand up to someone who thought you'd never fight back? And if you believe justice always finds its way home, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next story.